Ghosts and spirits has been a part of Japan's culture since ancient time. It is probably the most haunted country in the whole world, housing over thousands of shrines dedicated to spirits and kami and also yokai as well. So according to ancient Japanese belief, the Shinto belief, which still persists to this day, when a person dies, their spirit will become a lesser god, a kami. Then the family and the bloodline of the dead person will have to worship and care for the spirit. And in turn, the spirit will be the guardian of the family and the household. This symbiotic relationship shapes Japan's belief and also their way of life. Spirits or ghosts are not seen as a malevolent being, well, most of the time. They are worshipped and loved, although if a family fails to appease the spirits of the dead ancestors, then the spirit will bring down their wrath in the family in the form of poverty, sickness, or sometimes even death. However, Yurei are slightly different than the normal spirits of the dead. The word Yurei, yu meaning faint or dim, and rei meaning soul or spirit. Yurei are purpose or emotional driven spirits left behind on the world of the living to accomplish what unfinished business it had while they were still alive. This business can be from something like avenging their death to some mundane stuff like feeding your cats. So for example, in your last moment, you are ready to embrace death, suddenly you think about your cat and think about whether you have feed your cat or not. So in these last moments, that considers as an unfinished business. So because of that thought, your spirit will be doomed to become a Yurei. So there are several circumstances where your spirit can become a Yurei. So let's start with number 1. So when a person dies in a sudden or violent manner, such as murder or suicide. Secondly is when the person dies and in their final moments was filled with powerful emotions such as anger or hate or even love. Thirdly is that they want to finish their unfinished business in their last moments, as you can see, like what I just give the example of. And lastly is there were no proper funeral rites that was done on to the spirit of the recently deceased. So these circumstances can turn a spirit to a Yurei. The tale of Yurei has been a staple of Japanese horror tales from the ancient times, from Edo period and so on. There are thousands of tales of Yurei in Japan. However, there are 3 tales that has become somewhat of a staple or flagships of Yurei tales. They like to call it the 3 great Yurei of Japan. These Yureis are Oiwa, Okiku, and Otsuyu, the ghost of love and the ghost of hate. There are many reasons on why these 3 Yureis stood the test of time and are still relevant to this day. Maybe the tales carry the narrative that these tales are based on true stories, with artifacts or sites that are said to be actual things from the tales that exist to this day, like Oiwa's shrine or the supposed plates or well from Okiku's tale. Or maybe these tales relate to people as they revolve around humans' most primal emotions such as love and hate. So with the intro out of the way, let's jump into the 3 great Yurei of Japan. The story of Yotsuya Kaidan follows a housewife named Oiwa and his husband Iemon. Iemon was a ronin. After the death of his master, he moved to Yotsuya, Tokyo, to begin a new chapter in his life, hopefully getting a solid business and marrying a young beautiful woman from a rich family. However, luck wasn't on his side. It turns out his business wasn't as solid as he hoped, and his wife isn't as pretty and as rich as he had supposed. His business of making oilcloth umbrellas barely supports them, and the birth of his newborn son means more mouth to feed. Safe to say he hates his life, and forever finding ways to break from his wretched fate. So when he finds out that Ome, a granddaughter of the wealthy Ito Kihei, and their neighbor, is madly in love with him, he knows that she is a ticket to leaving this life behind and leave Oiwa behind. And also, as Ome's grandfather, Ito promises wealth and title if he is to marry her. So this is a no-brainer for Yaemon. So then he started to hatch a plan to get rid of Oiwa. So together, Yaemon and the Ito family conspired to bring Oiwa to ruin. Yaemon secured a poison which he sneakily administered to Oiwa every night when she is asleep. However, the dose was not sufficient to kill her, but instead melts one side of her face, her eye drooping over her cheek. However, Oiwa herself was not aware of what happened to her face. So, one day as she began to prepare herself for the formal visit of the Ito family, she tried combing her hair and finds out to her horror that chunks of her hair and scalp was brushed off by the comb. Meanwhile, at the same time, a man named Tokuetsu was hired by Yaemon to rape Oiwa so that he could frame her for infidelity. So, at the time of her trying to prepare herself, Tokuetsu came in the house and saw what had happened to Oiwa. He was horrified, of course. He felt pity and disgusted. So, he gives Oiwa a mirror so she could see what she had become. Oiwa, horrified, started to break down and cry. Tokuetsu spills everything, saying what Yaemon has been doing behind his back. Feeling angry, sad, betrayed, and hate all at the same time, she committed suicide. Seeing what had happened to his wife, Yaemon was happy with his plan being a success. Meanwhile, while all of this was happening, Yaemon also kills a servant named Kohei, who he caught stealing traditional medicines of the household. So he then nailed Oiwa's and Kohei's body to opposite sides of a door and cast it into a river, framing them as lovers and somehow committing some sort of lover suicide. All went well for Yaemon, but little did he know that Oiwa's curse has only just begun. During the wedding ceremony, as he lifts Ome's bridal veil, he expects to see the beautiful face of Ome, but instead the hideous face of Oiwa. Shocked, he instinctively lashes out his sword, only to find out he had decapitated Ome. Since that moment, he never knew peace. Everywhere he goes, he sees the ghastly face of Oiwa manifesting. One of the most famous depiction of Oiwa's ghost manifesting is the Paper Lantern manifestation. So while on the run, he meets the ghostly apparition of Kohei, the servant. He lashes out his sword as well, only to find out he had killed Ito Kihei, Ome's grandfather. So he ran and ran far away from anyone. Even when he was fishing, he keeps catching the corpse-bound door that he had cast into the river. His sanity begins to slip away and started to become more insane. He fled to the Snake Mountain Hermitage, and there he waits and lived in fear. But Oiwa's manifestation haunts him day and night. Everywhere he goes and everywhere he sees, he keeps seeing the face of his dead wife. Then, after much haunting by Oiwa, he kills himself because he could not take it anymore. So that was the story of the Ghost of Hate, Oiwa. Yotsuya Kaidan was created by the playwright Surya Nonboku for his kabuki. He was inspired by stories and news that he had read about murders and wives seeking vengeance. The story shot up in popularity and became one of the most successful kabuki plays. Ukiyo-e artists took this opportunity to create their own unique visual take on the story of Oiwa. Some of the artists' favorite scenes are when Oiwa manifests itself as a paper lantern to haunt Yaemon, the disposal of the corpse bound by a door, and Oiwa's realization of her disfigurement. There are many film adaptations as well. The first film adaptation of Yotsuya Kaidan being released in 1912. Oiwa's ghost has been one of the model for the Yamamura Sadako ghosts in the Ring movie from 1998. The shrine of Oiwa do exist, but from what I have read, it is not dedicated to Oiwa from the story. So the real Oiwa who lived was actually a normal woman with a normal life, with a loving husband, and they weren't poor. They were somewhat from a wealthy kind of family. So we have talked about the ghost of hate. So let us move on to the different end of the spectrum. Let's talk about the ghost of love. So the tale of the Peony lantern was adapted in Japanese folklore from a Chinese legend during the 17th century. And being as famous as it is, there are many versions of the story, but the most famous one is the one that I'm gonna share with you guys today. So a long time ago, there was a young ronin by the name of Saburo who falls in love with a beautiful woman named Otsuyu. She is a daughter of a high-ranking samurai under the service of the shogun. Seeing the totally different backgrounds, they started having secret rendezvous for some time and eventually planned to marry and run away together. Well, because there is no way in hell that Otsuyu's parents are going to approve their daughter's marriage with such a lowly ronin. So the neighborhood physician at the time, who introduced Saburo to Otsuyu way back, now realizes the smoldering fire between the two that he had helped spark could lead him to many problems, especially from Otsuyu's family's side. Because, you know, Otsuyu's family is from a rich family and Saburo is a ronin again. So he decided to create lies. He said to Otsuyu that Saburo had died of natural causes. Same thing was said to Saburo. So both were left heartbroken and filled with misery, especially Otsuyu. Otsuyu's mental health took a toll and she eventually passed away, for real this time. Then followed by her loyal servant Oyone, who was heartbroken as well because of her young mistress's death. On Saburo's side, Saburo inscribed her name on a memorial tablet and placed offerings daily. So as Ubon Festival of the Dead comes around the summer, he laid food and lanterns before the tablet and began his yet another night of sadness. When he was being sad and stuff, he suddenly heard the sounds of wooden sandals on the street outside his house. So he got up and begins to investigate the source of the sound. So as he slid the door of his house, there she was, Otsuyu, waiting for him, and besides her, her servant carrying a peony lantern. He could hardly believe what he saw, so he invited them in. So in their reunion and discussion among themselves, they concluded that they were both deceived as to keep them apart. So from this reunion, they planned to only see each other at night and separate at daybreak, vowing to each other that they would never apart again. So for several nights to come, Otsuyu and her peony lantern carrying servant comes. Otsuyu meets Saburo every night, they embraced each other and made love with each other. However, one night as they were busy doing some adult stuff, one of the neighbor heard the commotion and peeked in the house. What he saw horrified him. He saw Saburo embracing a rotting corpse, and another corpse can be seen with a peony lantern at one corner of the room. The next day, the nosy neighbor confronted Saburo and tells him what he saw. Saburo, of course, did not believe his neighbor. However, the neighbor insists Saburo to investigate Otsuyu's whereabouts in the day, as they only meet each other in the night. So Saburo went to the neighborhood where Otsuyu is said to reside. He checked high and low and every nook and cranny of the village, and could not find any trace of a girl named Otsuyu. He even asked the villagers, and they seemed to have no idea who he was referring to. So Saburo began to feel anxious and scared. Expecting the worst, he went to the local cemetery, and there he finally met her. A couple of fresh grave markers bearing the name Otsuyu and Oyone. Chill ran down his spine and he rushes back to his village. There he consulted the abbot of a local temple. The abbot prescribed consecrated Ofuda talisman slips to be pasted on every opening of his house to keep the spirits away. So when the night comes, the ghostly pair could not enter Saburo's house. Otsuyu began to break down and cry, begging and wailing to Saburo so that they can be together again in the name of love. Saburo tried really hard to fight against the temptation. However, after hearing the voice of his lover in sadness and desperation, led him to fold, as you can see, and he ends up opening the door. The next morning, the neighbor found the body of Saburo embraced by a rotting corpse of a woman. Saburo's last emotion must have been blissful, as his face showed pure bliss and joy. Saburo was then buried alongside Otsuyu and Oyone, now forever together in the afterlife. Such is the power of love that transcends the realm of the living and the dead. Quite a romantic story, although it involves necrophilia, which is disturbing to say the least. But again, this is a ghost story, and by its nature, it is supposed to evoke a sense of uneasiness among viewers and listeners alike. So the tale of Bancho Sarayashiki does not originate from kabuki theatre, unlike Yotsuya Kaidan with the story of Oiwa, nor was it imported from foreign countries like Botandoro with the story of Otsuyu. Bancho Sarayashiki, or the tale of Okiku, is by nature a native folktale from Japanese soil. Again, being as famous as it is, there are many different variations of the tale. However, I will give you the most popular version. Bancho Sarayashiki follows a maidservant named Okiku. She works under a samurai named Aoyama Tesan. He is, in turn, a vassal of Kodora Norishoku, the 9th Lord of Himeji Castle. However, he has been scheming a way to get rid of the Lord so that he could rule the province himself. He had planned to poison the Lord as he took his seat during the flower viewing party at Masui Mountain. However, word of a person trying to poison the Lord reached the Lord himself, and he decided to cancel the party, and Ayama could not follow with his plan anymore. So the Lord suspected a traitor among his men in the castle, so he hired a man named Danshiro to investigate. So this is where it gets interesting. Danshiro carried an unrequited love for Okiku. Seeing the current situation could benefit him and make him close to Okiku, he decided to accuse Okiku on the poisoning scheme. He confronts her and bargains with her. He offered to cover up her involvement if she becomes her lover. And of course, Okiku refuses. Then, Danshiro hatches another plan. He secretly hid one of the 10 heirloom Delftware plates that were a treasure of the Aoyama family. So in the Aoyama household, she is a maidservant, and by default, she is responsible for the household of the Aoyama family and all of their possessions. So, when one of the most valuable plates were missing, she began to panic and horrified. Danshiro then accuses her of destroying one of the plates. The plates themselves are very valuable to the family, even more valuable than Okiku's life, which is a life of a lowly maidservant. She denied Danshiro's accusation and couldn't believe one of the heirloom plates was missing. So she started counting the plates, and every time she counts again and again, it always ends with the 9th plate. The 10th plate is really missing. So reality starts to kick in, and she starts to think of what will happen to her. The Aoyama family, hearing what happened and actually believed Danshiro's accusation, capture Okiku, beat her, torture her, and then murder her, then proceed to dump her body in a well near the Aoyama family's mansion. From then on, night after night, Okiku's voice could be heard coming from the well. She could be heard counting the plates from 1 to 9, then let out a blood-curdling scream and wails as she could not find the 10th plate. Then she would begin counting the plates again and again. This made the Aoyama family unable to rest at night at all. Aoyama thought that this could not be a normal haunting, and he called an abbot to read holy sutras over the well. However, sutras after sutras, she does not seem to go away. The abbot, stressed out, started to think on other ways. Finally, he had an idea. So he waited there by the well, listening to Okiku's plate counting, and when she gets to 9 and was about to scream again, the abbot shouted 10. Okiku then seemed to calm down, and a sigh of relief can be heard from the well saying, "Finally." Then Okiku disappears for good, finally able to move on. Well, not long after that, the castle lord finally finds out the culprit behind the poison scheme and ordered Ayama Tesan's suicide by disembowelment and the dissolution of his family's holdings. So, in a way, Okiku is not the ghost of hate or love. Probably she is a ghost of sadness. A lot of depiction portrays her in a more romantical and sorrowful light as opposed to Oiwa. She is depicted as crying as she rises from the well. There is no hostility in the depiction of Okiku whatsoever. Well, most of the time. As for legacy, well, I wonder the idea of a ghost rising from a well does sounds familiar to you. Yurei stories are more than just scary stories. They are also commentaries of life back then in Japan, such as the question of the treatment of women, the position of ronins as a lowly class of people, the aristocratic society, and the caste system that was around back then. All of this contributes to the timelessness of these stories and these ghosts. Listeners and readers can understand them, can understand their motivation and also their characters. The ghosts in these stories are not just one-dimensional. The readers or listeners can understand why Oiwa did what she did. The legacy and impact of these 3 ghosts to the modern media and pop culture are immense. These 3 female ghosts help shape the mold of what will be the modern-day ghost stories. The long hair, the lack of feet, the hideous face, all of that can be traced back to the great Yureis of Japan. And nowadays, with the cult classic such as The Ring and The Grudge, the concept of Yurei has been accepted and has been a part of Western culture as well. So now, before I end the video, I will show you 5 paintings of Yureis. And I want you to list 3 similarities. Well, besides them being a woman, of course. So if you ask me, what are the similarities between these 5 paintings? One of them will be, they have black, long, flowing hair. Secondly, is that they are wearing a white kimono, which is what people call burial kimono, if I'm not mistaken. And lastly, they have no feet, floating with no visible lower part of their body. So these are the archetypal visual portrayal of Yurei. However, all of this can be traced back to one painting. The one painting that started this whole trope of how a Yurei is supposed to look like. And that painting is the painting of Oyuki, painted by a painter named Maruyama Okyo. So Oyuki was Okyo's lover who died. So one night, he dreamed that his lover visited him. So when he woke up the next morning, the image of his lover still strong in his head. So he decided to paint what he saw in his dream. And this is what he saw: the spirit of Oyuki visiting him in his dream. Her face has the look of longing and love, far different from the horrifying expressions that later artists would depict. So thank you so much for watching. It was a blast researching about these 3 female ghosts. I am so interested in all of this, like yokai and demons and stuff like that. And there will be a lot of those stuff in this channel in the future. So if you enjoyed this video, thank you for watching, and also thank you for clicking if you like maybe watch halfway and leave. Still, it means a lot to me. And if you do enjoy this video, feel free to subscribe for more videos like this. But yeah, anyways, thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.